Okay, let's dive right in today.
Sounds good.
We're looking at some interesting research that was just presented at the American College of Cardiology Scientific Sessions, ACC.25.
Yeah.
And this research looks at the connection between diet and how long people live, especially for folks who have to deal with cardiometabolic disorders.
You got it. And this is such a big deal because these disorders are something we're seeing more and more of all over the world, right? We're talking about things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease.
Yeah, those are the big ones for sure.
And they don't just appear out of nowhere. It's like this combo of our genes, our environment, and our lifestyle choices.
It's how we live day to day.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is how these conditions, they mess with both our heart health and the way our bodies process the food we eat.
So it's not just one system, it's like a domino effect. And even though we've made some strides in treating these conditions medically, I think we're realizing more and more that what we eat has a huge impact on how these things develop and how healthy we are overall.
Totally agree.
So what we're going to do in this deep dive is try to understand what this new research tells us about how different eating habits might affect how long people live who are already living with these challenges.
Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out that a lot of earlier studies looked at the general population, right? So this targeted approach is really valuable for anyone listening who might be dealing with these issues personally.
For sure. And what's really cool?
Yeah.
We've got two main studies from this research to break down.
Okay, let's do it.
The first one, it took like a wide lens view of how plant-based diets affect almost 78,000 people with cardiometabolic disorders.
Wow.
And get this, across 3 different places, the UK, the United States, and China.
Okay, so a really global perspective.
Yeah, a really big picture.
That's a massive amount of data to work with. And it comes from some pretty well-established long-term studies, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we're talking about the UK Biobank, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Study, so NHCANES, as it's often called in the U.S., and the Chinese Longitudinal Healthy Longevity Study.
That's right.
These studies have been gathering information for a long time, like from 2006 to 2022 in the UK, 1999 to 2018 in the US, and 2006 to 2018 in China.
Wow.
It's amazing the amount of data they have.
Right.
And the sheer number of people involved is impressive, around 55,000 in the UK, 18,000 in the US, and almost 4,500 in China.
Yeah, it's a huge sample size.
It is.
And the second study we'll look at use the NANES data, but it's specifically focused on how healthy drinking habits, what beverages people choose, are linked to the risk of dying early.
Okay, interesting.
And this time they looked at the general U.S. adult population, not just those with those cardiometabolic disorders.
So broader application.
Exactly. It lets us see if some of these dietary ideas could be helpful for a wider range of people.
Right. So it's not just about managing existing conditions, but potentially preventing them, too.
That's the idea.
Now, it's worth noting that the lead researcher for both of these important studies is Dr. Zhangling Shen.
That's right.
From the Department of Cardiovascular Medicine at the Second Zhangya Hospital of Central South University in China.
Okay.
So let's jump into that first study, the one all about plant-based diets in folks who have cardiometabolic conditions.
All right.
How did they collect all that information about what people were eating in these massive groups?
Okay, so at the very beginning of these studies, they asked people about what they usually ate, through questionnaires or those 24-hour dietary recall interviews where they try to remember everything they ate in a day.
Oh, yeah, this can be tricky.
Right. But it's important to remember that this was like a snapshot they took at the start.
Right.
And they didn't really track if people changed their diets over the years that followed.
So it's like a baseline measurement of what they were eating at that specific point in time.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when we say plant-based diets, that can mean a lot of different things to different people.
That's true.
So how did the researchers figure out which plant-focused eating patterns were good and which ones maybe weren't so good?
You hit the nail on the head there. That's where this study gets really interesting.
Okay.
See, to go deeper than just, is it plant-based or not, they use these 2 special diet indexes.
Okay.
You could think of them like scoring systems that give different points to different kinds of foods.
Okay, I'm following.
So the first one was a healthful plant-based diet index.
Okay, healthful.
And this one focused on foods we all know are generally good for us, like lots of veggies, fruits, whole grains, legumes, things like beans and lentils. And they even put tea and coffee in this good category.
So basically all the nutrient-rich whole plant foods we hear so much about.
Exactly, the good stuff.
And what about the other index? What was that all about?
Okay, so the second one was called an unhealthful plant-based diet index.
Okay, now that sounds kind of counterintuitive.
It might, right.
Because we think of plants as being healthy.
Right, exactly.
But I guess it's more nuanced than that.
It is. This index gave more points to plant foods that aren't as nutritious things, like refined grains, like white bread and pots of potatoes and, those sugary drinks that we know aren't doing us any favors.
Yeah, those are the sneaky ones.
Right.
They're plant-based, but not exactly health food.
That's it.
So this index was designed to highlight eating patterns that might be lower in animal products overall, but still high in those less nutritious components.
You got it. It's not just about cutting out meat. It's about what you replace it with that matters.
That's a really important takeaway.
Yeah.
It's not just plant-based or not. It's the quality of the plant-based foods you choose that makes all the difference.
Totally.
So they had these two indexes set up. What did they find when they looked at all that data and the risk of dying for people with these cardiometabolic disorders?
Okay, so the results were pretty eye-opening.
Okay, tell me.
They found that for people already living with cardiometabolic disorders, those who ate more like the healthful plant-based diet index had a much lower risk of dying from any cause during the study.
Okay, how much lower are we talking?
Like 17 to 24% lower.
Wow. That's a significant decrease.
It is, and they saw a similar drop in the risk of dying specifically from cardiovascular disease or cancer.
So eating more of those healthier plant-based foods seems to have a real impact on how long people live.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
What about the unhealthful plant-based diet pattern? Did that have the opposite effect?
It did, unfortunately.
Okay.
They found that sticking more to that unhealthful plant-based diet,
Yeah.
the one higher in refined grains, sugary drinks, and lower in those really good plant foods, led to a 28 to 36% higher risk of dying from any cause.
Oh, wow. So it really does go both ways.
Yeah, and they also found higher risks of dying from cardiovascular disease and cancer with that pattern.
That really drives home the point that it's not just about avoiding animal products, it's about replacing them with truly nutritious choices.
Right on.
Now, when they did all these calculations, did they factor in other things that could affect a person's risk of dying?
They absolutely did.
Okay, good, because there's always more to the story.
Right. So to isolate the impact of diet, they adjusted their analysis to account for a whole bunch of other factors that could influence health outcomes.
Like what kind of things?
We're talking about age, race, and ethnicity, sex, smoking habits, alcohol use, body mass index, and how active people were.
So they were trying to control for all those lifestyle factors that we know play a role in health.
Exactly. They wanted to see the effect of diet specifically.
And what's really impressive is that these patterns held up across a lot of different people in the study, right?
Yes, that's the amazing part.
It wasn't just one specific group that saw these effects.
I was really consistent across the board.
That's pretty powerful.
They saw the same patterns of lower risk with the healthful diet and a higher risk with the unhealthful diet across different age groups. Races, ethnicities, men and women, whether people smoked, how much they drank, their BMI, and their activity levels.
Wow, so it seems like this link between diet and mortality is pretty robust.
It does, and what's even more interesting is that these associations were also consistent across the different types of cardiometabolic disorders people had, whether it was obesity, type 2 diabetes, or heart disease, and even across those three different regions, the UK, the U.S., and China.
That's fascinating, especially when you think about how different those populations are.
Right.
When the average age of people in the UK and U.S. studies was in their late 50s, while the Chinese group was much older, on average around 84 years old.
Yeah, big difference there.
But even with that huge age gap, these dietary trends held true, which suggests a pretty strong underlying connection between diet and how long people live with these conditions.
It really does. It suggests that the benefits of eating lots of whole plant foods and the risks of eating less nutritious options might be relevant for a lot of different people at different stages of life who are managing these cardiometabolic conditions.
That's good news for everyone who wants to live a longer, healthier life.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered the plant-based diet study in depth.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears now and talk about that second piece of research, the one that looked at healthy beverage patterns and how they affect the risk of dying early.
All right, let's do it.
This one used the NANES data, but it looked at the general U.S. adult population, not just people with cardiometabolic disorders.
Right.
So what was the main focus of this part of the research?
The goal was to see how the overall mix of drinks people had in their diet might affect their chances of dying prematurely.
Okay, so it's not just about one specific drink. It's about the whole picture of what people are drinking.
Exactly. It's about patterns.
So how did they define a healthy beverage pattern in this study?
Well, they said a healthy pattern meant drinking lots of unsweetened tea, a black coffee, and low-fat milk.
Okay, sounds pretty reasonable so far.
And on the flip side, it meant drinking less alcohol, whole fat milk fruit juice.
Even though fruit juice is natural, it still has a lot of sugar.
That's right. And both sugar-sweetened and artificially sweetened beverages.
So really watching those added sugars.
That's the key.
Okay, so it's about choosing those mostly unsweetened or naturally lower fat drinks and being mindful of sugar, whether it's added or naturally occurring, like in fruit juice.
You got it.
And what did they find about the risk of dying early for people whose drinking habits were more like this healthier profile?
Well, just like in the plant-based diet study, they saw that people who stuck closer to this healthy beverage pattern had a lower chance of dying prematurely.
So what we drink really does matter.
These results tell us that what we choose to drink every day plays a big part in our long-term health.
It all adds up.
It does.
Now, I'm sure with both of these studies, the researchers also pointed out some things to keep in mind when we're looking at the results.
Of course, there are always limitations to consider.
Okay, what did they say?
Well, in both studies, they got the diet and beverage information from what people told them at the start of the studies.
Right.
And they didn't check back in to see if people's habits changed over time.
So it's possible that people changed their diets or what they drank during the study, and that could have affected the results.
That's a possibility.
What else did they mention?
They also said that even though they tried to statistically adjust for lots of things that could influence the results, there might be other factors they didn't measure that played a role.
You can't control for everything.
Right. And they emphasized that we need more research in different groups of people around the world to really confirm these findings and see how relevant they are for different cultures and lifestyles.
So more studies are always a good thing.
Right.
They help us get a clearer picture. So bringing this back to our listener, why should they care about all this research?
Well, if you're dealing with cardiometabolic issues or worried about them, this research gives you some really good ideas about what you can do to take care of your health.
Okay.
The research shows that choosing more whole, unprocessed plant-based foods, like lots of colorful veggies, fresh fruits, whole grains like oats and quinoa, and legumes like lentils and beans, could really help you live a longer, healthier life.
So it's not just about cutting things out, it's about adding in the good stuff.
Exactly. And on the flip side, being aware of and cutting back on less nutritious plant-based options and those refined grains and sugary drinks that we talked about is just as important.
Right, so it's a two-pronged approach.
It is. And when it comes to drinks, sticking with unsweetened tea or coffee, low-fat milk, and being careful with sugary drinks, too much fruit juice, and alcohol seems to be a good idea for long-term health.
So those are the key takeaways for our listeners. And, Dr. Chen, the lead researcher, also mentioned that it's not enough to just know about these links. We need to find practical ways to help people with cardiometabolic disorders eat healthier.
That's right.
It's about making healthy choices easier and something people can keep up over time.
Yeah, making it accessible for everyone.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we've looked at two important new studies presented at ACC.25.
Yep.
The first one showed a strong connection between a healthful plant-based diet and a lower risk of dying prematurely in people with cardiometabolic disorders,
Right.
while an unhealthful plant-based diet was linked to a higher risk.
Important distinction.
And the second study highlighted that healthy beverage choices like tea and coffee and limiting sugary drinks are associated with a lower risk of dying in the general U.S. population.
Yeah,
The bottom line from both studies is that the quality of our diet really does matter.
it does.
When it comes to plant-based eating, it's not just about eating plants. It's about choosing the ones that are packed with nutrients and haven't been processed a lot.
Right.
And the same goes for drinks. What we choose to drink has a big impact on how healthy we are and how long we live.
Totally agree.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener.
Okay.
Think about your own diet and what you usually drink every day, especially if you're dealing with any cardiometabolic health concerns or just want to be as healthy as possible in the long run.
Okay.
What small changes could you make based on what we've talked about today?
Good question.
Maybe try swapping out some of your less healthy choices for more nutritious ones.
Yeah, little steps.
It's not about making huge changes all at once. It's about finding sustainable ways to shift towards a healthier eating and drinking pattern.
It's about making choices you can stick with.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you next time.